Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ayo Akinwolere. On Friday night, Chelsea suffered a fourth defeat in 8 Premier League games. Having slipped from 4th to 6th, frustrations have come to the fore, including from star player Cole Palmer. So, has Maresca-ball gone flat? With us today, we have our senior writer for The Athletic, Oli Kay, plus our Chelsea correspondent, Liam Twomey as well. Liam, defeat at Brighton on Friday means Chelsea have only picked up 9 points from their last 9 Premier League games. Look, is this just about Brighton doing the double on Chelsea this season, or is it a little bit more deeper than that?
Well, I think if you look at the form for the last 2 months, it is something deeper than that. Chelsea are regressing significantly from what we saw in the first couple of months of the season when we spoke about this at the time. It did feel like more of a continuation or an evolution of the finish to the last campaign under Mauricio Pochettino than perhaps we were expecting. We were expecting maybe a bit more of a revolution of style under Enzo Maresca. Now, what we've seen over the last couple of months is that style has become more recognisably Maresca-ball, or at least the version that we saw at Leicester. But the results have declined significantly. You mentioned 9 points. If you look at Chelsea's form since their goalless draw at Everton, they've got 2 points more than Tottenham and Manchester United, who are the designated crisis clubs right now. So the trajectory is really worrying for Chelsea in the top 4 race. They're out of the top 4 now. Manchester City have far more momentum than them. Newcastle, Bournemouth, Nottingham Forest continue to defy gravity as well. So it's looking dicey to actually finish the season in the way that they expected to do, and never mind being talked up as fringe title contenders. Now they're being talked about as fringe top 4 contenders if things keep going the way they are.
Yeah, Ollie, this is a very different conversation to the one we were having even in December, I reckon. Huge inconsistencies for Chelsea right now, but you look at this squad. I mean, this is also a really young squad. You've got the youngest average age of a squad in the Premier League, 23 and a half years old. This is where sometimes, I guess, that naivety or that lack of experience may be really showing, because yes, when they're playing well, they're on a high, but when things aren't going that well, do they have the minerals to get over it?
Yeah, I think that the point you make is that offers a certain mitigation for the coach who didn't pick these players and didn't select these players. It offers mitigation for the players themselves who are young and are learning on the job, like the coach is. But this is a deliberate strategy by the club. They have decided to go in this direction with extremely young players, and yeah, you can look at that late run under Pochettino late last season when things started to click, players started to play with a spring in their step, and they got their wind in their sails and other such cliches, and it all looked very good briefly. And then likewise at the start of this season. But even within that run, even with that in that run, there were games where you thought, wow, when it clicks, when these guys get their tails up and get 2 or 3 goals clear, they look really confident. You can see the confidence flowing not just through Cole Palmer, but through the whole team. And Nicolas Jackson is, to me, a real confidence player. When he is on it, confident, getting good service, he looks a real player. But then it turns, and I don't think Chelsea have very often in the past 2 or 3 years won matches in difficult circumstances. They've not really ground out wins. They've been a team that seem to be very good when they're good, and when they're not on it, they just fall away. There were so many games like that under Pochettino last season. There have been so many games like that over the past few months where if it's not, the game isn't played on their terms, and if they're not comfortable, and if things aren't clicking, they just look like an immature, inexperienced group of players, which they are. And I excuse the players for that. I would make, I would say that gives the manager a certain mitigation, but it's no excuse for the club itself that has insisted on this fairly radical, fairly extreme policy, signing such young players, so many young, inexperienced players, thinking they're being really clever, telling everybody they're being really clever by doing this. And to be honest, I don't think they've been clever at all.
Okay, well, on this point, Simon Johnson was down at the Amex for the Athletic on Friday and speaking on our dedicated Chelsea podcast, Straight Out of Cobham. He was left to question the character of this Chelsea squad as well.
Just as worrying as the performance was what happened at the final whistle. Players not even sort of remotely looking to go over there. It took Oli Kay, the assistant first team coach, to sort of bully the players to make some kind of effort to go anywhere near. A lot of them made a very half-hearted. I kind of referenced it in a post on X and also in my live briefing piece that they made as much sort of an advance as they did during the game. Only Reece James sort of broke into the penalty area and sort of got close to the away end. And I thought that was pretty pathetic. Like, if you're going to play like that and then follow it up with that kind of cowardice, not to front up, again, I think it highlights the lack of character in this squad at the moment.
Yeah, Liam, Simon spoke about the lack of fronting up after full time, and in his analysis on The Athletic compared the defeat to the 4-1 loss under Graham Potter away to Brighton, I think, October 2022. Was there a fear Friday night could have been a turning point for Maresca?
In terms of the fans, or in terms of just generally his results and development of the team? I think with the fans, there is a sense that something has shifted. I mean, it's remarkable, but we are, 3 months, a little more than 3 months removed from Chelsea fans chanting, "We've got our Chelsea back," as they beat Southampton in Southampton to solidify their position second in the table. And I think that shows how far sentiment can shift in this day and age. But it also shows how much Chelsea's performances, as well as their results, it's the performances, I think, that have been the most worrying thing, because even in the games that they've won in this 9-game stretch, they've been deeply unconvincing, and they seem to have lost the conviction of the way that they were playing under Maresca. The fast attacks that underpinned a lot of their best attacking play, that has gone. Now, I think to some extent that has gone at the direction of Maresca, because as we said, that was one of the weird things about early in the season. Chelsea were playing well, scoring goals, thrilling with this fast attacking football, and Maresca kept saying, slow down, we don't want to be in basketball games. That's the expression that he kept using. And they're not really involved in basketball games now. They have possession, they have control, until the other team get the ball, attack them quickly. And the problem that they've got is they're not creating as much as they were, but their opponents still are. And when you add to that the fact that Chelsea haven't been as ruthless in front of goal, now Nicolas Jackson has gotten a lot of the criticism for that, and I mean, he's been culprit number one until he got injured, but he's certainly not the only one who hasn't been ruthless enough in the final third. It's even happened to Cole Palmer to an extent in the last few weeks. When you have that at one end, and then you have opponents starting to take more of their chances, in the first 2-3 months of the season, I think opponents were underperforming their XG against Chelsea by about 3 or 4 goals. That has evened out. All of that narrows the margin for error, and Chelsea are also making more errors. They're making errors in possession that lead to goals, and you just get the impression that every team that plays them now knows, if we let them have the ball for long enough, but not really let them get anywhere with the ball, eventually they'll give it to us in an area where we can do them damage. And that was very much Brighton's game plan in the second of the 2 games that they played against them, and they won it even more convincingly than the FA Cup tie. Chelsea, that was maybe the worst thing about it, was not just the result and the performance, but the fact that it wasn't remotely shocking, given the way that they've been playing. And it seemed like once they conceded the second goal, they just felt this is completely over. There was no sort of response, no raising of the intensity, and no sense that they could turn the tide.
Yeah, Oli, it's fair to say that Maresca's got some problems he definitely has to solve. But, isn't this sort of the danger of hiring a coach with such a small sample size? You never quite know what you might get. And also Chelsea, historically, are a club known to get rid of people and bring them in. The last couple of seasons have even taught us that, even though this is a new regime. But I was also thinking, because there have been so many changes, this kind of has to work for them.
Yeah, it's totally, as you say, it's a really small sample size in terms of his coaching career. I mean, he had that brief spell with Parma, a season at Leicester, who were favourites to get promoted and nearly didn't. I've no doubt he's a really good coach. I've heard really good things about him as a coach from his time at Manchester City and so on. But in a way, it's not just a coaching job. You've got this bunch of young players who just need to be dragged in a certain direction. You need to be energized. You need to unify the whole club, get everyone sort of moving in the right direction. It's another cliche, but it really needs. I mean, Pochettino is a really good coach. Graham Potter is a really good coach. They've had good coaches over the last few years, and it's more than a coaching job. It's a job where you just have to bring the whole thing together and probably drag these players through their growing pains, and that's difficult when the coach himself is, he's 45, which isn't young for a coach these days, but he's only been a head coach for, what is it I don't know, probably about 80 matches, definitely fewer than 100 matches. So it's a problem for him. It's a challenge for him. He's learning on the job. He's got all these other players who, you use that phrase, small sample size. Well, Nicolas Jackson was signed on a small sample size. Mudryk was signed on a very, very small sample size in terms of, how quickly his reputation had come about in Ukraine. And you've got all these players who are just signed on the basis of one good season or a half a good season because the sporting directors or the owners think this is brilliant. What we're doing is so inspired, it's genius. And it just isn't. They spent a fortune. Look, they could get top 5. They could get into the Champions League. I certainly expect them still in this zombie state to win the Conference League. But that is nothing. The progress is nothing like good enough for the amount of money they've spent, which is extreme, unprecedented in the history of world football. Am I right in saying that? It's the biggest 3-year spend in world football. And it's got to the point where if Chelsea win 3 on the run, everyone's really excited because, one or two of these players, not just Cole Palmer, might actually be okay. And they're talented players, but it's just the whole thing just looks so underwhelming and unimpressive to me. It's built on such sort of weak foundations, I think.
Yeah, Liam, I can see rival fans just licking their lips, clasping their hands at the fact that the wheels might be looking like they're falling off again for Chelsea, considering the amount of money they've spent. But Oli makes a really interesting point. Is that a fair point to say that actually, from the coach to the team, there's a small sample size there of experience in general?
Yeah, I think that's very fair. I mean, you can look at every part of the club. The sporting directors were never sporting directors anywhere else before they were hired. They were recruiters at clubs that were known for being smart recruiters, but they weren't the most senior figures in those operations. You've got the ownership, which remains divided between Clearlake Capital and Todd Boehly. But if you're talking about the part of the ownership that's actually running the club, Clearlake Capital, Behdad Eghbali, Jose Feliciano, they don't have a background in football, in running football clubs. This is their first go at this as well. So there's not really much of a track record to hang your hat on for anyone really at Chelsea. And I think that's where a lot of the frustration comes in for fans, is they see the inexperience in the squad, and that's one thing, and that's frustrating enough when the team is struggling, and they see the inexperience of the coach. But then the people that are then making the decisions are also by definition inexperienced because they haven't been doing this for very long. Certainly not at this level, with this level of scrutiny and pressure and stakes. So there isn't a lot to trust in, or you're asking a lot to just say, trust us, we'll get this right. Because what do you have to point to say that, that we did this before, trust us this time? That isn't the situation that Chelsea are in.
Enzo Maresca speaking post-match on Friday about the collective responsibility at Chelsea after a frustrating night for Cole Palmer. Liam, how much of a concern is this form, or more the impact him not scoring has on Chelsea's overall attacking output?
Yeah, I wrote about this quite recently for The Athletic, about how Palmer's baseline goal and assist numbers have gone down a bit since the October international break. I think it was 8 in 17 Premier League games, 8 goals in 17 Premier League games leading up to the Brighton loss. And just the one assist. He'd created 32 chances before that Brighton game without an assist. And that tells you something, which is that he's still creating and that his teammates are not finishing off those chances. But his scoring's also dipped a little bit, and I think, well, he's certainly not the problem. He's certainly not the problem at Chelsea. That much is clear from statistical analysis you do of his performances. He's not dropped off very much, if at all, really. He's still the player that opponents most fear, the player that opponents gear their entire strategies towards taking out or limiting. But that, in a sense, is the problem that Chelsea are dealing with, because Cole Palmer is not a surprise to anyone anymore. He's not a breakout star in the way that he was last year. Everyone knows he's one of the best players in the league, and they treat him accordingly. And it's up to Maresca as a coach. It's also up to Palmer's teammates to find ways to leverage the interest that he commands from opposing defences and exploit that, because there will be spaces elsewhere. But Chelsea haven't been able to do that. They get very little from the wings at the moment. They invested significantly in 2 wingers in the summer, in Pedro Neto and Jadon Sancho, who have been pretty underwhelming, it has to be said, in terms of what they've been able to contribute, carry very little goal threat, but aren't creating all that much either. Noni Madueke is sort of more consistently aggressive, but he's injured now, and you really felt that in the first half against Brighton, that Chelsea had quite a bright opening 20 minutes. And then as soon as he went off and Sancho came on, it felt like a lot of the force of their attacking play left. And then on top of all of that, you have Nicolas Jackson injured now, and that completely changes what Chelsea are able to do in the final third, because for all that his erratic finishing is the primary discussion point whenever his name is brought up, he does so many other things to enable Cole Palmer and the other Chelsea attackers to do their best work. The way that he stretches games, his constant intelligent movement, the way he leads the press, that makes Chelsea better without the ball. Maresca's spoken a little bit about this. He's sometimes, his quote was, "Sometimes you have to play without a player to realise how important they are." And in the 2 games against Brighton, we've seen that Chelsea have virtually no penalty area presence without him. Now, the question that a lot of fans are asking is, why do they not have another striker? Why do they not have anyone else in the squad who is capable of doing that?
As Joao Felix not just gone to Milan? Just imagine they get rid of an attacking player again,
Yeah, so that's one question. That's a significant summer signing who's been loaned out after 6 months. But equally, Joao Felix isn't a true number 9. He would be another kind of false 9 option, a bit like Nkunku, which is not really what Chelsea need right now alongside Cole Palmer. They need a runner. They need someone who can actually occupy those spaces. And they went into the season with Jackson's primary backup being Marc Guiu, a guy who played a handful of professional games for Barcelona and was 18 years old. It it seemed unreasonable to expect him to provide legitimate, high-quality Premier League cover from day one, or even in his first season. I think we've seen in the Conference League minutes that he's had that he's not there yet. He might be someday. There's lots. There are things to like about his game, but he's not there yet in terms of throwing him into Premier League matches. So this is where the criticism of Chelsea squad construction comes in. They've amassed this massive portfolio. We've used that word before, of players, of talented young players under Clearlake Capital, some of which are at Strasbourg or on loan elsewhere, some of which haven't even joined yet. But some of the moves feel more in service of the portfolio than the football team right now, in terms of how this season has been prepared for and managed. And they've managed to leave themselves short in some key areas. One of them is up front, one of them's in midfield, where Moises Caicedo has to play every minute of every game because they don't have anyone else. And you also look in defence, where Trevor Chalobah had to be recalled, and Wesley Fofana's injuries had a massive impact. They don't have another centre-back who can do what he does. So just all over the pitch, there are still question marks. But in attack, yeah, Palmer's still Palmer, but virtually nothing else is working for Chelsea.
It's a real problem. And as Liam was saying, I mean, Mark Guillot is a really good, promising young player, but I don't think Chelsea can be talking about some hard luck story with Jackson getting injured and Guillot getting injured at the same time, because they've given him, I think, 73 minutes in the Premier League this season. That includes games where I think there've been 9 games where he's been on the bench throughout in the Premier League, just unused substitute, which includes games where they've needed a goal, been drawing games, been losing games, and needed a goal and not turned to him. So I don't think Chelsea can be saying, look, we built our squad in a very sensible way. We had everything, all our contingency plans. We've just been unlucky. They haven't been unlucky. I think you could look at Arsenal's misfortune with attacking injuries and say, yeah, that's quite unlucky, but still maybe should you have done more to mitigate against it? But Chelsea certainly should, with all that they've spent, and their backup centre forward is someone they haven't trusted as a backup centre forward, except in the Conference League. And it's just their problems are self-inflicted. Their problems come from a totally flawed transfer strategy, recruitment strategy. It's, as Liam says, it seems to be more about the portfolio than the team.
Liam, I just back to what you're talking about Jackson. I was, watching the Brighton game. Cole Palmer looked like he was having someone on the pitch. I think he shot the ball wide, and then someone must have had a word with him. Do you think that's why he's looking for a strategy? Do you think that's why he's maybe having a go or having big discussions with people on the team, because he himself doesn't feel like he can play his football without Jackson there as an aid? And is Jackson actually really that important?
It's always hard, and I'm always wary about trying to get into a footballer's
head.
No,
of course.
And Cole Palmer doesn't let that much slip in terms of what he says. So in terms of why he's frustrated, I'm not sure. He clearly is. You can see it in his body language. There have been a couple of occasions in recent games. There was an occasion in that most recent Brighton game where he's taken a shot when a pass was objectively the better option. And I think that's where one of those little arguments came from. He had a bit of a back and forth with Enzo Fernandez, and I think Pedro Neto too, because Chelsea got the ball to the edge of the box and they were kind of one pass away from having a really good chance. They had a decent chance and Palmer took the decent chance rather than... And you don't know why he did that, whether he just backed himself, or is that a reflection of a lack of trust in teammates? Who knows? But in terms of Jackson, yeah, he's crucially important because of the things that he does, but also because he's not replaceable in this squad. And the other aspect of it, as far as Palmer goes, is that he and Palmer have a really good chemistry between the two of them. They've built up a really good understanding over that Pochettino season of where the other one's going to be, what kind of runs they make. Jackson knows exactly where to lay the ball off for Palmer to run onto. Palmer knows exactly when to try and spring Jackson. in terms of goals they've created for each other in the Premier League, they are well on pace to surpass Didier Drogba and Frank Lampard quite soon, which would be a notable milestone. It'd be in the next season or two, if they keep playing together. So they are a really good partnership, and they make each other better. But yeah, there are lots of reasons for Palmer to be frustrated. The big thing for Chelsea is that he just doesn't look like he's enjoying his football in the way that he was earlier in the season and was for much of last season. And when Palmer's enjoying his football, that's when he's at his most dangerous. And when he's not enjoying his football, then you're probably not going to get the very best version of him.
Yeah, Liam makes a good point there, Ollie. He doesn't look like he's enjoying his football. This is a player that signed a bumper contract, 9-year contract, which will take him to 2033. Real talk, though. I mean, could Palmer outgrow Chelsea? If they're not getting Champions League football, for instance, Ollie, could we see this player 9 years for sure? But the money's good. I'm sure he'll want to go somewhere else.
Yeah, of course there is. Because if you look at a 9-year contract or 10-year contract, whatever it might be, it's still subject to the normal conditions of a contract. Players get sold all the time when they're frustrated, when their ambitions aren't being satisfied, or whether they want to move to a bigger club, better team. Now, Palmer's 22; he's 23 at the end of the season. I can't imagine that he wants to be playing in the Europa League and Conference League next season or beyond. And look, there's a good chance that Chelsea still get into the Champions League. It's probably going to be top 5 next season. But if he's spending his Tuesday nights, Wednesday nights watching Champions League on TV, preparing for a Conference League or Europa League game on the Thursday night, that's not what Cole Palmer wants to be in his career. So yeah, of course he will want to be in the Champions League, and it doesn't necessarily have to be next season, but I don't think he will want many more seasons like this season, where he's basically got European weeks off in the first half of the season because the competition is considered so insignificant, as a test, that Chelsea are playing their reserve team in the Conference League. That is not where they want to be next season. They don't want to be in the Europa League either. They want to be in the Champions League, and I'm sure there's a real drive to be in the Champions League. But for players like Cole Palmer, well, Cole Palmer in particular, but maybe Caicedo and whoever else too, they want to be in the Champions League, and it will be unacceptable for a club that has spent so much money not to be in the Champions League. There would be a financial challenges associated with that in terms of income and so on, but it's probably less sustainable from a player point of view. If you're Cole Palmer, you want to be in the Champions League.
Well, Liam, how well have Chelsea adapted to what Maresca wants? I mean, if you look at some of the stats from Friday, Chelsea 69.5% possession, but lost the XG count, had fewer shots, and as mentioned, had no shots on target. Now, you worked with Tom Harris on an analysis of Maresca's controlled style of play ahead of Friday night's game, and is there an argument to say that actually this team performs better under chaos than actually to try and control a match?
I think it's a nuanced one, because in attack, there's certainly reason to think that some of Chelsea's attackers do their best work in transition. Cole Palmer finds passes in those chaotic moments when opponents aren't set better than just about anyone else. Nicolas Jackson, when there's space to run in behind, is really, really hard to deal with. You've got Noni Madueke, who loves to run at backpedaling defenders. And Pedro Neto showed at Wolves, probably more than he has done at Chelsea so far, that he can be a super, super dangerous transition player. You think about the goal they scored against Newcastle at Stamford Bridge earlier in the season, the sublime pass that Cole Palmer played to Neto, to Jackson. I think that was like 7 seconds from one end of the pitch to the other. That is not Enzo Maresca's vision for Chelsea and how they should play. In fact, he said after that game, that was his first mention, I think, of we don't want to get into a basketball game. But there is definitely an argument that weaponizes Chelsea's attackers to the fullest extent. But it's also true, and I think we have to acknowledge that Chelsea were historically bad defensively under Mauricio Pochettino last year in terms of their defensive record. And the constant chaos, the kind of unstructured nature of the team was a big part of that. They made so many mistakes. They were so disorganized when they were trying to defend against teams that were counter-attacking them, that it was really, really ugly. And the defence has improved this year under Maresca. There has been a significant improvement, but it's not improved enough. In terms of their average XG this season, they basically expect to give up 1.4 goals a game, which is about mid-table in the Premier League. It's actually very close to Manchester City, which would normally be a badge of honour, but not this season. So they're not historically bad defensively by Chelsea's modern standards, but they're still not good enough at that end to be anything other than clinical in attack. And so what we've seen in the last couple of months is their ruthlessness has deserted them, but their defence hasn't improved, and therefore your margin for error shrinks to almost nothing. And so you're getting quite a few draws and losses that just look really bad and undermine the whole tenor of Maresca's the momentum that Maresca had seemed to build up.
Yeah, Oli, that comparison to City is interesting. Obviously, Maresca being a disciple of Guardiola, but also Guardiola, a coach who loves to control matches. But then you look at the personnel difference and the experience difference from Manchester City to Chelsea. It's vastly different, and you've got a bunch of young kids who are still trying to figure out how they're trying to play and find their strengths in the game. And then you've got a City team, obviously, that, you know, maybe not this season, but historically have got some of the smartest, brightest, and most experienced players. I mean, can we expect that from Chelsea? Control at this stage in their progression?
I think so. I think it's difficult. One area where I sympathise with Maresca is just if you really are trying to introduce a totally new way of playing, I don't think that the schedule really is conducive to that. Where you're playing, you know, every midweek, and you know, it's been Thursday nights in the Conference League, and very little recovery time before Premier League games. It's not very easy to introduce this whole new style. But to me, I mean, I agree with Liam. Chelsea's best this season has been when they've been playing quickly, counter-attacks, transition-based football. That is what they've been good at. And it's what Cole Palmer and Nicolas Jackson and, you know, Pedro Neto, Noni Madueke, although they've not been consistent at all, that is what they're good at. And that's where they've looked very good in certain matches. And it's often been when the opposition has been coming onto them and they've been able to, you know, they've been leading in a game at Chelsea. They've been 1 or 2 goals ahead, and then they've been able to run riot like they did at Southampton, like they did at Wolves. That's what they've been good at. So to be going in a completely different direction, just one thing that came to mind when I was when Liam was talking earlier about Maresca and how he's saying, yeah, that isn't particularly the way I want to play it. It's a young coach wanting to play a much slower, more controlled way. And it took me back to, I mean, it's over 10 years, but Brendan Rodgers at Liverpool. He arrived there as this sort of disciple of slow, patient, possession-based football, and was very evangelical about it and about the way he played at Swansea. And he didn't want chaos. He didn't want quick football. He wanted to pass teams to death. And then he suddenly realised, I've got Suarez, I've got a very young Sterling, I've got Coutinho, Sturridge. He turned that into he moved away from his beliefs in some ways and embraced the strengths of the squad. And to me, the strengths of this young squad are quite similar, where you've got players who are so good on that side of the game. But Maresca seems to be, I don't know, diluting those strengths maybe, and maybe it's a step back to take 3 steps forward, and maybe we'll all be looking at this in a year's time and saying, wow, you know, he was right to dismantle it and rebuild along his lines. But at the moment, it does look, as Liam said, it does look like they are neutralising their strengths a bit and concentrating on things that, as a young, thrown together squad, they're not terribly good at.
Yeah, when you look at the comments, Liam, in the articles and even social media, this is one of the biggest gripes with the fan base, isn't it? It's the style of football that Chelsea are playing. I mean, how long can they hold out, right? I mean, when things aren't going well, that's when the fans are at their loudest. But also, from a club standpoint, what is the expectation from Maresca this season? Is it Champions League? Is it anything like that? Or does he still have a bit more leeway to really instill his style of playing onto this team?
Well, first of all, in terms of what the club expect from Maresca, this was always seen as kind of like a double season because of the Club World Cup. They were going to review the 2 years as one continuous whole, really, and I don't get the sense of any great appetite to bring that forward. They have full faith in Maresca in terms of this system. They are all the way in when it comes to this style of football. This is a much bigger bet than they made even on Graham Potter, which wasn't this. It wasn't these sporting directors that hired Graham Potter. It was the ownership directly. But hiring Maresca is more of a philosophical thing for the club about the way they want to go about football at every level. They're trying to implement a similar style of football throughout the academy. They're trying to do it at Strasbourg with Liam Rosinia. So this is a Blue-Co-wide emphasis, which leaves you wondering, if results at some point dictate that Maresca isn't working, what happens then? Because this is a lot more than just a simple coach hire and a 5-year contract, which would be hard enough to row back on. They already did that once. But the investment goes further than that in terms of what they're looking at as the future of Chelsea and the way they want it to grow. But there's also a fundamental tension here with the supporters, because a lot of the Chelsea supporters I know and a lot of the ones that go to games have never liked this style of football. Chelsea in this century defined themselves in opposition to Guardiola, to beating Guardiola teams, to being pace and power and playing without the ball when you have to and making the most of your chances, and not this kind of religious devotion to possession and control. And coaches that have tried to bring that to Chelsea in the past have not fared well. I remember the toxicity around Maurizio Sarri, because Abramovich tried this. He had a Guardiola fascination himself, and as well as trying to get Guardiola to coach Chelsea, he hired coaches that he thought could do the same thing at Stamford Bridge, and Sarri was really not embraced at all at Chelsea, despite on the surface having quite a successful season in charge of the club, because the football just did not resonate with the crowd at all. Graham Potter, that was one of many reasons why it didn't resonate at Stamford Bridge, and he never got the crowd behind him. The style of football was just not to the fans' liking. It's the interesting exception in all of this is Thomas Tuchel, because Chelsea under him were even slower and more patient and at times more mechanical in possession than they are now. But he won the Champions League, so he could do whatever he wanted. That he kind of had goodwill forever because of that triumph. But in the main, Chelsea fans have not, or at least the ones that go to matches the most, have not warmed to this style of football. And that is something that Chelsea and Maresca are going to have to confront as well. But at the end of the day, I think I've always been of the view it matters less what you do than how well you do it. If they win consistently with this style, eventually fans will get behind it. But if they're not winning, the style will become a stick with which to beat them.
I think for the first time in the modern era, you're seeing Chelsea as a team which is focusing on long-term development, which you could say is good in one sense, but in the past, Chelsea's past 22 years have been about short term. It's been about hitting those immediate targets. It's trying to win win today, win tomorrow, not worry about what's too far down the road. Now, there are flaws in that approach. And I think probably a lot of us criticised Abramovich at times for being too knee-jerk, too short-termist, not focused enough on long-term development. But I think there's a compromise. I don't think Chelsea are getting the balance right. I think it's also a lot to ask a club, or fans of a club who have been used to being competitive all the time, to suddenly get behind a project which is about, I don't know, it feels like they haven't really been competitive for 3 years, and it feels like they're also not going to be competitive outside of the Europa Conference League or whatever in the near future.
Okay, well, let's leave it there, gents. Oli, Liam, thank you so much for your time. And also, before I go, I want to tell you about Connections at Sports Edition, a new game for sports fans from The Athletic. It's basically a daily dose of trivia. It's so satisfying to solve and quite addictive as well, actually. Play now at theathletic.com/connections. We'll be back tomorrow. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.